Guru Radhe Radhe Guru Guru Radhe Guru.
Hello and welcome. In this episode of My Time with Radha, I speak with Prakasha about science, spirituality, and his time with Swami Radha, a guru who always encouraged her students to experience things for themselves. We discuss the theme of light as he reflects on Swami Radha's brilliance, her poetry, and her generosity. Hi, Prakasha.
Hi, Katie. Good to see you.
Good to see you. It's wonderful to meet you and be having this conversation with you, especially after I feel like I've already met you through your writing. And so now I'm putting a face to the writing, to the words, and also a voice as well.
Okay. Well, it's good to hear that. And I hope that you got something out of it. In any case, I'm happy to be here. Did we do a Divine Light mantra first?
Yes. I'll let you begin with it.
I am created by divine light. I am sustained by divine light. I am protected by divine light. I am surrounded by divine light. I am ever growing into divine light. Namaste.
Namaste. I think we can probably just start with the beginning. Could you speak a little bit about how you got involved with the ashram and when you first met Swami Radha?
It's quite a story, but basically, I was coming into a period where I'd been working intensely and really wanted to find balance in my life. So I started to take hatha yoga classes at the community center. And very soon I went to the yoga room in Berkeley. And after I'd been there only maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I noticed a poster. Swami Radha was coming to talk. I didn't know who this woman was, but she had a kind face and I was kind of seeking for new answers in my life. And so I thought, well, her talk was on the body as a spiritual tool. And so I thought, okay, that's worth the drive back to Berkeley on a Friday night to hear. But I had no idea what to expect. The only thing I knew about her really was that she was the spiritual director of an ashram in British Columbia, which I'd never heard of. And I'd never heard of her teacher, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I was a real newbie. But nevertheless, there's a lot of grace that was involved. And my first impression of her was, it's like a friendly grandmother with a cold. She was with a slight Northern accent, and she kind of would cough every so now and again. I thought, boy, am I really expecting Swamis to be perfect? And of course, she soon dispelled that silly notion that Swamis couldn't get colds. But in fact, she had allergies, so I was really a misperception. In any case, I was immediately taken by her manner, in particular about, okay, very scientific approach. If you have spiritual ideals, keep a diary, as I kind of rephrase it. Oh, she means a lab notebook. Write down your ideals and write down what happens in your life and how you're meeting them and so forth. And that made a lot of sense. So, okay, that's not so bad. But then she also introduced the mantra, and particularly the mantra to Taher. And again, I'd never heard of Taher. And I had some idea of Eastern philosophy, but not really any depth on the various Buddhist bodhisattvas. And I was just immediately taken by the emotional impact this had. And of course, when I wrote about this later in my new journal, I didn't even mention the emotions. I thought, that's what go in dyers, those silly emotions. But it quickly became real to me that those were part of the process and the heart was essential. So afterwards, I really didn't know what to make of all this, but it really seemed like something I needed to pursue. So I started to take classes and workshops to Swami Radha. And the first workshop I had with her, I read my paper and she immediately turned to her assistant and said, "You take this one," and walked out of the room. But of course, this was a way of getting around my arrogance, my scientific arrogance and pride. And later, as things went on, I was more able to really listen. Even in that first workshop, I took copious notes and was able to learn both from what her assistant did with me and from the experience that others were having.
Why do you think she gave your paper to her assistant?
Well, I think that I'd realized most of the other people that, oh my God, I've gotten a serious business. This could change my life. And of course, I was pretty scared. And so I think she probably picked up on that and said, okay, this is a more gentle way to enter. But it wasn't long before the next summer I went to the ashram, so I got to know her much better. And at that time, these are some of the last workshops Swami Radha gave in community workshops. And so I was told I was very fortunate. And then the other teacher said, well, and so Swami Radha interjected this, but she doesn't tell how much I go after. And the teacher said, well, that's the privilege. And I'd have to agree. And so Swami Radha really combined a fierce intellect, tenderness, compassion, but mostly is really down to earth. It was not off in the spiritual clouds. It was real. How do you live this?
Very tangible.
Yeah. The other thing she introduced to that first workshop was the light invocation, divine light invocation. And it registered on me, but compared to the mantra and the reflection, it wasn't the main takeaway I had from that initial talk. But nevertheless, it stayed with me.
Wow, that's amazing. And could you also say a little bit about sort of your scientific background? Because I suppose that you were already in that world when coming into yoga. Is that true?
That's true. So I have a PhD in physics from Berkeley, and I was at the time working on two major research projects, one on the evolution of stars and how they explode, and the other about how working on developing lasers that could have defense applications. And this at the time was part of the Star Wars program. But it was really, from my point of view, we need to figure out what these things can do one way or the other. And my thought was, and still was, this might help bring peace to a troubled world. In any case, it was all intensely political and controversial. And some people were strong opponents and some people were strong supporters. And we were the technical people that charged with, okay, try to make this work. So when I met Swami Radha, it was just after we had had a really successful experiment. And afterwards, I'd remembered previous spiritual experience I'd had. And so, okay, now it's time to find balance. And that's what immediately led me to taking Hatha Yoga. So it's all of a thing. So that's how I came into it. And nevertheless, I continued doing physics and both things for several years after that. Spent 2 years at the ashram, so I didn't do it all the time, but I've always considered myself a scientist, but also a devotee as time went on. So it was those two sides. And so I said, I want both, as much that scientists can find out. So she really encouraged that.
Mm-hmm. And how did your relationship with her develop? You mentioned coming back to the ashram. You just said living there for 2 years. How did that take place?
Well, living there was after she had passed, but so it developed into a very intense relationship and very close and supportive. And she was very interested in science and had a very good intuitive grasp of it. I was a single parent father at the time. We first went to the ashram. He was 8, almost 9. And she was very taken with him. So they had a great relationship. And so she could never predict what she would do. One of the first things I said to Ted was, well, sometimes I just want to go off and meditate in the mountains. And she said, no, that would not be the right thing. And then when I told her more about Star Wars, she said, well, do your duty without passion, and told me the stories of her husbands, what their experience had been with authorities and with the army and so forth. But basically her concern was personal. And of course, she became my guru as time went on. I visited her many, many times at the ashram in Spokane and Victoria and Vancouver. Until a year or so before she died, I was commuting. I'd had at one point an apartment right next to her that I really was only there a few days a month, but it was a place she could use for other people to visit. And I could never tell what she would want to talk about when we came. Sometimes it was about opera. Sometimes it was about science. Sometimes it was about dance. Sometimes it was about her poetry. And she also introduced me to Kashmiri Shaivism. And the way she did that was interesting because this is about 6 years after I met her. She'd given me this book to read. And then she asked a little, well, what's that word in your mind? I said, what word? There's lots of words in my mind. I said, well, is it a Sanskrit word? She said, yes. And so I said, well, it must be Prakasha, which is the word for the light of consciousness. And then she said, well, that might be a good name for you someday. And I was completely blown away. This was really scary because I knew that involved probably celibacy and other things. And so I definitely wasn't ready for that, but it stuck in my mind. And about 4 years later, I did take on that name. So anyway, it's hard to underestimate the intensity and the unpredictability. Sometimes if I started to pontificate about science for too long, she would stop me. When I started kind of getting scared and kind of talking soft, she would basically say, "What are you doing? Next time I charge you triple." That was just after I came back from the teacher's course, which now is a development course. Okay, now I've had a lot of these new experiences and kind of lost in spiritual fantasies, and she really brought me down to earth.
Mm-hmm. What do you think distinguished her as a guru and as a teacher in comparison with perhaps other teachers that you had been around? Because you mentioned you had been doing Hatha yoga previously as well.
Well, I mean, the Hatha yoga teachers were pretty much on the physical level.
Mm-hmm.
And I understood from reading that there's a spiritual aspect to it, but they were focusing on alignment and so forth. I could get feelings of connection and so forth from doing the asanas and intuitions from doing them. Swami Radha is really the first spiritual teacher I had other than reading books. And of course, it's understandable a lot better after interacting with her, and particularly her poetry, which I found extremely illuminating.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, she handed me a pile of little pieces of paper, some of which were just tiny little scraps. She said, "Well, put these in the computer." And without a lot of explanation, but it turned out these were poems that dated back to the mid-50s when she was first meeting Divine Mother, and later on about her understanding of the light in deeper and deeper ways. And it was just the right thing for it to help me and to, keep it from being intellectual, which of course for me was, one thing that was always close to the surface. Well, how do I understand this? How do I figure this out? And of course, there's always the time for just relax, just let the light come in and just see what emerges. And she was very understanding about that.
I was just going to say, what a privilege to be able to go through her poetry and seeing her handwriting. That must have been a very, I would imagine, intimate experience.
Well, I always felt very graced and grateful.
Mm-hmm.
She always seemed happy to see me. She always had something up her sleeve. One time she opened this little box and there was this ring on it. This would have been in 1993, just before New Year's of 94. And so I was at the ashram and I got this message. I had taken a nap after we had various organizational meetings, and someone came and woke me up. "Swami Radha wants to see you right away." Oh my God, what have I done now? But she had a ring to give me, and it was a ring in the form of two intertwined cobras. And she called it the Kundalini ring. And so I said, "Do you want me to wear it on my left ring finger?" And she said, she didn't quite demand that, but she smiled, and so I did that. It didn't fit at first, so I had to get it enlarged. But in any case, that was kind of like my Kundalini wedding ring, which is sort of a symbol of my connection.
And do you still have the ring?
No, that's another part of the story. In 2003, I was hiking in Yosemite, and I slipped on a sandy rock and flung out my hands. Cold morning, very cold morning. And I didn't notice at first, but my ring must have flown off. Felt badly about that, but I searched and looked in the drains at home and didn't find it again. But I still tried to keep my connection to Swami Radha and so forth. But these material things are nothing that can be never a crutch. And so it caused me to reflect on what I really wanted to do.
Well, I've said this frequently to others during these interviews and conversations, is that I think it's incredible how diverse Swami Radha's disciples are from one another, and especially you as a scientist, finding her and being so attracted to her teachings and kind of her integrity. I think it's really special. And you've already shared so many precious memories and moments that you've had with her. But is there one memory that's particularly potent for you right now?
Well, I think the thing that's most relevant right now is that one of the things she did, this was at the end of 92, she had been asking me to write articles on things about what we had talked about. And I'd first thought, okay, this is not so hard. It's all on my desktop. But then she said, "I want you to write a book." And that was hard. And not so much because it was a book, but because she wanted me to write about the connection between science and yoga in the context of my experiences with her, or she wanted me to write my experience with her while bringing in the relationship between science and yoga. And she wanted it to be for a general audience. So it's all this stuff, okay, it's both my heart and my mind. It's sort of just things that have been very private, sort of exposes those to the whole world, including my colleagues, if it comes out. So I made a good start on this before she passed, but it was something that was difficult. And she kept saying, well, I really like what you've done so far, but what do these few things add up to? You need to do more. This is just a procrastination game. Anyway, it's that promise that I made. And I made a good start on it before she passed. This is about the same time that Lily Tananda was writing her book. And then after she passed, I had set aside some retreat time at the ashram, hopefully finish that book. And when I came there was so much else that was pressing after her passing that I wasn't able to do that. And when I came to the ashram a few years later, it was also not considered high priority. But nevertheless, that stuck with me. And my partner of over 12 years died in beginning of 2020. And I was just completely distraught after that until I had the following New Year's an epiphany of reconnection with the light with Swami Radha. And that's what brought me back to reviewing my old journals and teachings and remembering my promises, including to write the book. And so the last couple of years I've been working pretty intensely on that. And it's, I think it's approaching the point where it's in good shape to go forward. If it never gets published, which I'm hoping it will get published, it will still be a great experience in remembering and keeping my promises.
Would you like to share the working title?
Okay, the working title is Echoes from an Inner Shore, the Scientist and the Yogini.
Yeah, that's incredible. I look forward to hopefully reading it one day.
Well, we will get a chance. I've been encouraged to send it out to publishers and so forth, and I will do that and see what happens. It's one of the things where it's, you just have to trust what will happen needs to happen will happen and not to get too hung up on one way or the other. Because many things can be just teaching exercises. And it's, Swami Radha always said, things happen in unforeseen ways. She talked about that in her life experience.
I kind of want to bring us towards a sort of drawing away from the outline that I had shared with you, just because I have this curiosity of myself. You've been talking a lot about the two worlds that you occupy, the scientist and the yogini. And I know many people might feel that way too, especially myself, being in academia right now, being in school, but then also trying to navigate the two parts of myself. Did she ever guide you in any way through that? Or what was her advice or her kind of perspective, and how did you move through that process?
The simple answer is yes. But guiding is a funny word, because she was never spoon feeding. She was sort of like introducing me to Kashmiri Shaivism. It's like putting out this in the poems and little tidbits and seeing how that. Sometimes she would be emphatic. Like at one point she said, well, it seems like you have three options. You can stay California, you can come live in Spokane, you can come live at the ashram. But I'm not going to tell you what to do. You have to figure it out by yourself. And there's no real right. It wasn't that she had the map in front of her. She had the sort of intuition that to be open to those things. And she talked about in her life when she needed to make a decision, she would do all her homework, all the different options. And then she would just stop and go and do other things for a while and just watch for a dream or an intuition or whatnot that would make it clear what the next stage would be. And that was kind of her counsel, and that's what I tried to do. And it turned out that over time I did all three of those things. But basically, she had a great respect for science, and she thought there was much scientists could find out, and particularly if they worked with people they developed their own spiritual connection and worked with people that did. However, she repeatedly warned, if you get lost in intellectual games, then even Divine Mother can't help you. it's not so much the science that's the issue, it's the arrogance that often comes with it. It's like, I know, you don't know. If only you know. She told a story, I don't know if you know who Papa Ramdas is. She said, well, he was once giving a talk at Berkeley, and he had to give his talk in the kitchen because they said, well, unless you have an advanced degree, you can't talk in the lecture hall. And they said, what can you prescribe for academics like us? What kind of advanced guidance can you give us? And he said, humility. And it turned out, Swami Radha said, well, you know, Papa Ramdas actually had a degree in engineering, but he didn't let it slip at all when he did that. He went the other way. He completely left engineering and was completely into devotion. But Swami Radha didn't encourage me to do that. I mean, she wanted me to both my heart and my mind. 50-50, she said. You know, sometimes she would be very stern, but usually she would be just curious. How does it work? And she would really watch how I talked about it.
Well, and listening you kind of talk about that and the aspect of humility, I think it's Socrates who said, all I know is I know nothing, or the more I know I know nothing. And that feels very fitting.
That's the conclusion I finally came to in my book. You know, things, it's okay if things are still a great mystery. I'm more than satisfied with what echoes back from them. So it's like this sense of interconnection of following the light, trying to find it, trying to follow the thread of it. And the thing of it is there's not a division between sitting and meditating, sitting and chanting, trying to do physics, trying to write. There's not a division of those things with a sort of underlying flow of connection. And it's sort of always accessible. And so, yeah, it's completely unreasonable for us on the individual level to think we can know everything. I think we can have a sense that we are connected to everything.
Wow. Yeah, so many things to reflect on, but I think now's probably a good time to move to the theme of the day, and that of light. And I didn't know, Prakasha, that what your name meant. Do you want to say that again? The light of consciousness?
It means the light of consciousness.
Yeah, so it's very fitting for our theme then of the light.
In some ways, in Sanskrit, there's two words, there's Prakasha and Vimarsha. And literally in Sanskrit, the roots mean to shine forth. Kash means to shine, Praha means forth. But there's another one, which is Vimarsha, which is reflective awareness. And they're kind of like Shiva and Shakti, you know, sort of like there's a pure awareness, a sense of being and so forth, a sense of I am, but can't do anything. That's like Shiva. And then there's Vimarsha, which is reflective awareness that brings that into creation. It's like Shakti, like Divine Mother. And it's very much an interplay of it. But anyway, in that sense, that was the word that Swami Radha saw in my mind. And so it's the closest word in Sanskrit for the divine light. There's other words for it, but and it's abstract. It's not like, it's nothing you can hold on to, a shape or a form. For me, it's an ideal. I can't claim to know that or have embodied that to any conclusive degree or specific degree, but it's
an aspiration, perhaps?
It's an aspiration, but it's more than an aspiration in the sense that I can connect with it. It's just not a hope of, well, maybe I'll find that one day. It's like, oh, yeah, there's the sun peeking through the clouds. Oh, now it's cloudy like it is today, and I can't see the sun, but nevertheless, I can remember it. So anyway, let me not quibble too much, but yes.
Well, let's see what Swami Radha has to say about light. It took me a while to find the right quote or the one that felt. I had so many options, so it was challenging to just pick one. But I found something from Light and Vibration that I thought I would bring forward as we discuss more what light might mean. Light is reflective awareness, and wisdom radiates through the light like a pulse. Light has great power. If we reflect, we tap into this power of light, and we can see that life, all life, is movement and energy. Life is a wave. not a straight line. And so I wanted to ask you, what is light? What does light mean to you? And in your answer, if you could kind of both offer some scientific reflections and spiritual, and perhaps they're actually closer than I might have guessed in the first place.
So light is reflective awareness. So basically, I think of light as consciousness, as kind of a collective consciousness. It's that power of, and it contains both the power of to understand, to know, but also to create and to act. And so from the closest physical analogy to it is energy. So energy can be, the form of energy taste can change. It can be movement, it can be potential, it can be chemical bonds, it can be nuclear energy. But nevertheless, they're all transferable into each other. And if you add them all up, it's all conserved. It's not created or destroyed. And Swami Radha often made the connection between consciousness and energy. And she said that just like energy can't be destroyed, neither can it's indestructible. It may change forms, but it's not gone. It was never gone, really. Well, physics is all about conservation. Most of the laws of physics are conservation laws that say when you add up all the different ways things can be, there's something that stays the same. And in the midst of all this dancing and change. So light also is, it's both a wave and a particle. And consciousness is both the individual concentration of awareness, was also this spread out field of awareness. And so there are many very close analogies between them. And I kind of have the intuition, as is the ability to measure things, gets better and better, particularly with quantum interferometers, that we're able to see some of the more subtle effects. You can already see them. You can push people to say, oh, light interferes with itself. And they say, well, matter interferes with itself to form these beautiful patterns of interaction. And I think that continues on up. So anyway, both science and at least some forms of spirituality would say that light is energy and consciousness and the power of action, all wrapped up in one.
Wow. What a great answer. And how has light been a part of your relationship with Swami Radha?
Well, as I said, she first introduced me to the light invocation, the very first talk that she gave. I'm trying to figure out who this woman was. And it's one of the things that I didn't immediately start a daily practice of it, but I soon, fairly frequently, we certainly did it with classes and workshops. But then it came to be a way of coming back to a centered place. And I love to do this outside, particularly if the sun was shining, particularly if there were leaves that the sun was shining through. And I would I have from decades and decades now, refound that place in my heart and find the place and offer it back and put people and things and projects in the light. So it's been a key part of it. But it's not just the formal light invocation. It's as I say, following the thread of the light. Okay, that's coming to light swinging through in that person, that incident. That even my reaction, someone cuts me off. What has happened? Okay. What's behind the anger? It wasn't the thing behind the anger, the light behind the anger. It's like it's energy that comes up and I can choose to use it for something good or something not so good. And one of the last things Swami Radha said to me, which was on the phone maybe 2 or 3 days before she died, she said, play for the Kuan Yin, not serious, but playful light. So he's always encouraging me to lighten up. That came all the way through but it's that sense of stepping back from the immediate, getting caught up in the immediate emotion, the immediate action, the immediate goal, the immediate sadness, or even the immediate joy. What's behind this? Just to allow it opening to something else to come in. So that's probably the main spiritual practice I've done. I've I've done much chanting and on a regular basis and so forth. But that sort of following the light has been the thing that I've most connected with and benefited from.
And hearing you talk about that playfulness of the light, or that idea of lightening up, also reminds me of her phrase of, I am not the body, I am not the mind, I am light eternal. Was that ever a big part of your relationship with her? Like, was she saying things like that on a casual basis?
Yeah, absolutely. We had detailed discussions about her spiritual cosmology. She very much talked about, that consciousness was indestructible and how that was related to what happened after you died or before you were born. And it is eternal, but it's not separate. It's not that there's these separate little things that go around bouncing around forever. It's like a wave that forms in the ocean, and the waves mix, and the waves, and she would call it a vortex. But yeah, and that's one of the things she asked me to write about. And Swami Radha would never expect anyone to take any of the detailed cosmology on blind faith. It's always a matter, okay, test it out, follow your heart, see where it leads. Your experience, may come at it from a different angle. She was always said with respect to, her guru told her with respect to religions, don't try to change Catholics into Hindus or even yogis. You just make them better Catholics. So it's like, okay, there's something underlying everything that can't be quantified, but can be experienced. But if you try to describe it, you inevitably use different words, and people use different words and have different impressions. It's not worth fighting about or even arguing much about. Although sometimes it's good to see the different perspectives. If you're doing comparative religions, that's something that you probably have noticed.
Yeah, the threads that kind of connect a lot of different traditions in these abstract ways. But yeah, and hearing you talk about that too, I'm thinking now about, for me at least, in my mind, the accessibility of the light, and especially through the divine light invocation. What's been really, the first time that I practiced it, what was really powerful for me is that feeling, that sensation of actually feeling the light after doing it, and how that can, manifest in different ways for different people, but the potential for it to be felt and not just imagined per se. I think that's really incredible.
Also, if you're doing it in a group of karma yogis, even if things have been really tense before, okay, I think we better stop and eat a light, but afterwards something else often happens.
Absolutely, yes. Oh, and there's been so many times at the ashram where I remember this one particular moment where some sort of emergency was happening, and I showed up to the scene, and immediately I was starting to get very emotional, and Swami Samayananda was there, and she looked at me and she said, and I was with another young lady, we were both like having a little bit of a maybe anxiety attack or just a lot of flowing emotions. Swami Samayananda looked at us and immediately said, go do the light. And we did, and afterwards, something moved and something changed. And so yes, very powerful.
Well, that's how you know that it's real. That's why I was always saying, it's not a matter of blind faith. Try it. I can give you the tools. I can't do the work for you, but try it and judge by the results. And, don't get hung up on doing things always the same way, because that's a crust that forms. It's not the light. It's like a crust forming on lava that it solidifies and darkens, but there's still something underneath there that can be re-experienced. So it's a very practical thing. It's not saying, please do this or that. It's like finding that open place, that receptive place, and an offering place, and then letting what wants to emerge from that, through that, come through.
And so you've kind of already spoken, I think, about this next question, but I wonder how it is that you connect with Swami Radha today through your writing or through practices. Where do you find her?
Well, I have over my altar, I have a big picture of her. It's the one when she's in a sari, and it's probably taken the same year I met her when she was 73. So she has this big halo of white hair, but she still kind of looks like a young girl in some ways. It's a very strange big compassionate eyes. And so I can really find, it's really easy to reconnect that way. Also in the light invocation, I just remember her. It's hard to put into words, and it's hard to say exactly what I'm connecting with, but it really seems like I can have a sense of her sometimes sitting there tapping her foot or saying, "Oh, now, Prakasha," or that's right. I would say the biggest single answers are poetry. I wore out the tape of her poems when I first got it, and I don't know if you've ever listened to them in audio form, but it's by far more powerful than written in the book. That's powerful too.
It's certainly so powerful. I have them on my phone where I have all my music, and sometimes I'll shuffle through my music and her voice will just come forward. And often when a poem comes from her, it's usually has something to connect and relate to what's happening in my life. So it feels very auspicious.
I was writing about the evolution of consciousness. This is when I was first writing about it. This wasn't recently. It was probably somewhere in the mid-90s. I was driving back from having satsang, and I had a tape of her talking, her Easter talk that she'd given at the ashram, and it kept jamming. She kept saying, the evolution of consciousness. Nothing else matters. And I must have heard that, a dozen times. Okay, that's a pretty clear message. So this little thing, it's sort of like when you're reflecting into language hatha yoga or when you're reflecting on a dream. It's what comes through. Intuition is one of the mysteries, but it's that intuition, but it's more than a random thing. You can flip a dice and say, okay, what does the number 6 mean to me? And still get some benefit out of it because you're interacting with your own mind and your own intuition. But her tools really make that easier to do, I think. So I think that people have been receptive to that. Her approach is not for people that, want to be spoon-fed. It's not for teachers that expect blind faith from their students. It's always for people that are encouraged to try it out and see and are allowed to experience, to find their own approach to the divine. It's not a rigid path. And you can tell by the different approaches she took with different people that she wasn't rigid. She was a mother. She was a spiritual mother, and she didn't want to have a lot of followers. She took off her orange robes when people were only worshiping her robe. And she followed that all through her life. She wanted an intimate group of people, of disciples or aspirants to teach and to, be receptive to the light that is in everything. She was one manifestation of it. Boy, after she passed, I was really crying and putting her in the light, and I could just feel this burst of joy come through. And she was so happy to be on the other side and to be able to have this broader view and be able to help people at a broader level. I think she's probably the best example of a bodhisattva that I know of. It was a different religion, but it's religion isn't the point. It's what underlies it all.
Well, and here is the ashram 60 years later, still impacting people's lives and sharing that quality of light and compassion with young people and people of all ages. So certainly her work is continuing, and I'm so grateful to have had this conversation with you and to kind of get a glimpse of your relationship with her and the complexity of that too.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to talk, and it's a privilege to help in whenever I can to further Swami Radha's work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Prakasha. Namaste.
Namaste.
I hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode. Yasodhara Ashram is located on the unceded traditional territory of the Tanaha and Sanaxt peoples. You can learn more about the ashram by visiting our website at yasodhara.org. You can also follow us on Instagram and YouTube. Until next time, I'm Katie Taher, and this is My Time with Radha.